So my name is Colin Farrell. I'm an Agri-Technology specialist with Perennia Food and Agriculture Corporation. I'm housed in the Agricultural Services Department, and I'm based out of the Bible Hill office. Together with the Agri-Technology technician and my counterpart, Shoshana Noman, the goal of the Agri-Technology program is to apply research at the field level on weather-related tools and sensors to support proactive decision-making and promote the adoption of innovative tools and data by farmers across the province, mainly through extension efforts. So in doing so, this presentation was prepared to provide Nova Scotian farmers and the broader agricultural community with a better idea of some of the uses for weather stations on farms. Listed on the left is our contact information. Please feel free to reach out with any questions that you may have. So the agenda for today's presentation, just quickly give a quick recap on the 2023 weather. We'll go over one of the weather stations that we're familiar with and the sensors. We'll look at how to access that sensor data. And then we'll look at some practical uses that we've seen for weather stations on farm. Give you a quick look at farm data tools, and then some questions and answers. So 2023 was a wild year for weather in Nova Scotia. We had, to start off, we had a very warm January, which was about 5 to 6 degrees above normal. And then following that, that warm period, we saw the temperatures plummet during the polar vortex in early February. We saw temperatures go to the -20s, -30s with more extreme wind chill values. That took us into the spring. We had a very dry spring, very little snowpack, very warm end to the month of May. It was very windy conditions as well during that time. And that led to several wildfires in the province, with the province seeing its most devastating wildfire season ever. From June 1st to August 31st was the cloudiest and wettest summer on record. Province-wide, we saw ranges from 400 to 800 millimeters during that time period. A significant amount of that rain fell in just a few hours during the historic rain and flooding in July, where we saw thunderstorms bring about 100 to 300 mils locally, leading to the devastating flooding on July 21st. And then to end off our summer season into the fall, we saw post-tropical storm Lee, which wasn't too bad, but it certainly kept people on edge, certainly following previous year's Hurricane Fiona. Over the past 2 years, Perennia has assisted Nova Scotia producers and industry organizations to install and utilize the Davis Vantage Pro 2 weather station on their farms. Perennia owns 12 of their own stations, and so we've gained quite a bit of experience with this station in particular. The Davis brand weather stations was chosen because they have excellent local reputation. There's been some in Nova Scotia that have been operating for close to 15 years now. They are regularly and commercially available in the province, and they provide real-time data that's required by our industry. Another benefit is they can be easily maintained locally at a reasonable price. We know of farmers who have up to 7 of these stations on their farms and are installing more, and they're kind of a middle of the road in terms of cost. So the components of the weather station start off include the EnviroMonitor cellular gateway, which is that solar panel looking box mounted on the wooden pole in the infographic. That's the hub that connects the weather station sensors and automatically uploads that data to the cloud via a cellular connection. Cellular data fees are for 5 years, and it uploads the data in 15-minute intervals. And this is also where the barometric pressure, or the barometer, is installed as well inside that Enviromonitor gateway. Next, also mounted on the wooden pole, towards the right-hand side of the pole, is the Vantage Pro 2 cabled weather station. This has the air temperature and relative humidity sensor, and those are mounted in the white radiation screen that's below the black features. And that is to stop the sensors from heating up in the sun and cooling down in the wind. Also contained in that unit is the rain gauge, which is a tipping bucket or tipping spoon. I think it has a 0.2 millimeter sort of resolution. So it takes 0.2 millimeters of rain to tip the spoon. And that's mounted at the 6-foot height per the recommendation from Davis. Also in there is a solar radiation sensor. The job of the solar radiation sensor is to tell us the level of sunshine. It's watts per square meter, and typically about 80 watts would tell you that it's daytime, and it's useful for an overall determinant of growth. Also, kind of in the package of the main weather station is the anemometer, which will look at wind speed. It's mounted at 16 feet. It's a traditional style mechanical wind speed sensor. And then the wind direction is a mechanical vane, also at that 16-foot height. Next up is the Enviromonitor node, which is the solar panel looking item, the white box to the right in the infographic. And this lets you install and connect additional sensors to the weather station. So that's where you can see the leaf wetness sensor, which measures or records leaf wetness in minutes. So you can also install a soil moisture sensor or temperature sensor, and the placement or depth of those sensors depend on the type of crop, generally putting that sensor at the depth of the roots. And those can measure at any depth. And roughly this total package was about $6,500. So certainly not cheap, but again, kind of the middle of the road in terms of cost. And I mentioned there is the activation fees and the cellular plan that's required to transmit that data. So this system measures air temperature, relative humidity, wind speed, wind direction, rainfall, barometric pressure, solar radiation, leaf wetness, and soil moisture. Some additional parameters that are calculated from those measurements are the evapotranspiration, the wet bulb temperature, wind chill, the heat index, the temperature, humidity, sun, and wind index, and the dew point. So that's a bit about the weather station. So now on to accessing the data from the sensors. I've listed sort of 3 different ways to achieve that. We'll talk about the first 2 now, and then we'll come back to farm data tools later. But the first option is using the Davis Instruments WeatherLink dashboard. That is, you get a pro account when you purchase the weather station. So the first feature of the WeatherLink dashboard is the bulletin, and this is where you would go to view the current conditions that are being recorded at the weather station. So you can see on this image, you can see the wind speed, total rain for the month and the year, wind direction, the barometer, and there's a few more of these charts that are just out of view that aren't included in this screenshot. but very useful place to come and get a quick view of what's happening at the weather station and at the site. Next up is the data tab. So this is where you can view historical records since the date of installation. The weather station, again, is recording every 15 minutes. So over the course of one day, you will see 96 rows of data generated, and you'll see the measurements for each of those intervals. So this is, there's only a few of the parameters that are in view in this screenshot, but if I was able to scroll to the right, you would be able to see all of them. You can set custom date ranges if you don't want to scroll through a year's worth of data. So you can see I have it set to visualize 1 month starting at a specific date. There's also an export option to download this data, depending on the date range as well, to a CSV, which is compatible with Excel. And then another useful feature here under this data option is the monthly summary. So clicking that, you can generate a monthly summary. So you're seeing the total for that day instead of seeing 96 instances for one day. So you can see max, min temperatures, average temperature, average dew point, a lot of those averages per day, precipitation, pressure, wind speed. Down at the bottom, we get some useful stats as well. So you can see monthly total precipitation down the right-hand corner. It's 30.2 mils for this station. Something that's pretty useful is the greatest 24-hour precipitation. So it helps explain the extreme of some of those precipitation events. This is from that from a station during that polar vortex event. So if you look down at the 4th, you can see some of those low temperatures, like minus 24.9 was the lowest that the station recorded during that event. So quick way to get some useful information. Another feature of the WeatherLink is the charting. So you can create custom graphs and charts from any of the sensors, and you can combine them into one graph. So this took probably less than a minute to generate this chart, and it is plotting the average soil moisture with rain. You may notice that it looks like the soil is drying out after rain, but actually a lower soil moisture value measured in centibars would indicate a wetter soil. So you see after each bar, which represents rainfall, you can see the soil moisture value spike and then proceed to dry out after that rainfall event. We'll look more at the soil moisture sensor readings later on that may make more sense then. Another useful feature is the alarms. So you can set an alarm for specific conditions. So if you wanted to know that a certain amount of rain had fallen and be alerted about that because you're going to be away from the farm, you could set that. If you wanted to set a wind speed threshold, you could set those here and receive alerts. So another way to visualize or to see the sensor values is through the Mobilize app. It's an agricultural focused app from Davis. A lot of the similar features to WeatherLink, and both WeatherLink and Mobilize are available to station owners or those who have shared access. And one of the most useful features I found from Mobilize is the frost alerts, which we'll take a better look at here in a little bit. So now on to the benefits and uses of the weather stations in agriculture. And one of the biggest benefits to having your own station is just having access to data that's close to the field and in near real time. and it gives you an accurate look at what's happening in that specific microclimate. Driving in this morning, it was minus 19 when I left my place, and by the time I got to town, it was in Truro, it was about -9. So big differential, small change due to the time, but totally different temperatures in two different areas. So just to highlight the importance of having a station um, to get access to data from your microclimate. And then beyond that, the weather station also gives you a historical record to look back on if there is some extreme weather or something that you'd want to explain at a later date. So one of the most obvious and most commonly cited uses for the weather station, it may seem simple, is to monitor remote conditions. So if you had a field that was really far away from your farm, you could set up a station at that site. The weather station is a self-powered standalone unit. It can be placed anywhere that there's sufficient cell signal. So, you can avoid that unnecessary travel to fields that are far away when the conditions are unfavorable. And that may mean just taking the pickup truck to check on things before you come over with the combine or the sprayer or whatever it might be, and just have a peek at that before you leave, and either confirm that before you leave or stay home. And something that we've heard from farmers is this is a great space to share your stations amongst your farming community. So if you have a friend or colleague that has a station somewhere that you have some remote fields, perhaps you could share stations and both benefit. So soil temperature for optimal seeding timing. Agriculture practices rely heavily on climatic conditions. It's risky to make management decisions based on the calendar date. So to ensure better germination, one of the key factors is to consider that optimal soil temperature. Planting before the optimal temperatures are reached risks seed death or poor germination and limited initial growth. Adequate soil temperatures for germination range wildly for different crops. But for an example, the optimum soil temperature for planting field corn is about 10 degrees Celsius. So you could use your soil temperature sensor to monitor when you have consecutive days at 10 degrees to have that extra level of confidence when making that decision to start seeding or planting. So this is somewhere where you could use those dashboards to just check those sensors and then make that decision. Another use is monitoring the wind speed for making spraying decisions. So again, we can monitor wind speed and direction. You could be doing this, in the office before you go to the cab or go to the machine. Or you could have the Mobilize app with you on your phone in the cab and be monitoring conditions from there. Again, you could set some thresholds for that wind speed, and so you could be notified when conditions become unfavorable. That would keep you spraying during optimal conditions, which I know is challenging. But you would know that, the application is reaching the intended target depending on what you're spraying. And obviously the risk of spray drift getting into a neighbor's field or one of your fields that is not compatible with that spray. And on that same note, I mean, if that were to happen to you from a neighboring farmer spraying their crop, if you did have a weather station there, it could serve as a record to help navigate that with them. And again, just to highlight knowing what those wind conditions are in those remote fields before you would take a sprayer to the site. So using the soil moisture sensor to assist with irrigation decisions. Water is essential to plants. Too much can cause roots to rot and suffocate the plant by preventing oxygen absorption from the soil. It can encourage the growth of fungi and plant diseases. Too little water can cause moisture stress that can kill the plants or reduce yields. And just knowing when to irrigate and when to stop it can be a guessing game. And it's typically done just according to the best estimate of the farmer of what soil moisture might be like and what conditions are in the forecast. So a weather station with a rainfall sensor replaces the rain gauge. So just the benefit of not having to go and check the rain gauge, again, especially in remote conditions, remote sites, no manually emptying those rain gauges anymore, and then keeping access to the historical and current conditions at any time. So the chart from the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs. This could be used to relate the soil moisture sensor readings to plant available moisture. So again, 0 is wet and 100 is dry when readings are provided in centibars. So looking at a site that has a sandy loam soil, it has about 90% available soil moisture at a soil moisture reading of about, say, 12 to 13 centibars, and at 50% available soil moisture at a reading of about 40 centibars. OMAFRA suggests that overhead irrigation be triggered before 50% of available soil water is depleted, and for drip irrigation, that would be triggered before 20% of available soil water is depleted. So that's 80% available water, and approximately at a reading of about 17 centibars. And just generally, soil moisture sensors that remove that guesswork from making irrigation decisions, provide an extra level of confidence. And just sort of as a general rule of thumb, if any of you are interested in this, just a way to get started. And this takes a bit of experimenting in your own fields to get comfortable with, but about 0 to 10 centibars for your sensor reading would mean that the soil is saturated. 10 to 30 centibars, it's adequately wet. 30 to 60, usual range for irrigation for most soils. 60 to 100 is that same usual irrigation for heavy clays. And then getting into the 100 to 200 centibars, the soil is becoming dangerously dry. So again, you see below is the sensor readings from WeatherLink. So those could be easily checked before turning on or off the irrigation. So frost warnings. Frost can be a devastating force of nature when it comes to farming. A frost that hits late in the spring or early in the fall can devastate a crop. It especially affects the soft, actively growing parts of the plant, such as flower and vegetative buds. Many of you will probably remember the frost that occurred in early June 2018. It was just days after a 28-degree high, and then temperatures dropped to about -2 degrees Celsius. I think it caused about an estimated $34.3 million in damages to wine grapes, strawberries, blueberries, apples, cherries, and pears in the province. And frost is generally the formation of thin ice crystals on the ground or other surfaces, and it occurs when temperatures drop below freezing and the temperature reaches the dew point. Very similar process to the formation of dew, except happening below the freezing point. Local topography has a large role in determining if and where frost develops. So cold air will settle in the valleys since it's more dense than warm air, making those areas more prone to frost. And on the other side of it, valleys also shelter areas from stronger winds, enhancing the effect. So knowing that a frost is coming could help farmers know that they could take some protective measures, and monitoring those conditions for frost. So the using the Davis Mobilize app, you can set frost warnings for your air temperature sensors. You could have multiple air temperature sensors on multiple nodes throughout your fields, and you can set threshold temperatures to receive real-time alerts. And considering that frost typically happens in the middle of the night, that could be just some peace of mind that if that is going to occur, that as long as you'll wake up from an email or a text, that you'll know about it. So, and you can also look at daily forecasted low temperatures as well in the app. So if there is a risk of frost in the future, you can see it there as well. So next is assessing for monolinear risk using leaf wetness sensors and the air temperature sensors. So monolinia, if you're not familiar, it's monolinia blight. It's a significant disease for wild blueberries, and I believe high bush blueberries as well. It can happen in the spring of the fruiting year. There is this model that is based on wetness duration and mean temperature that can estimate the severity of the infection period. So this is an example where you could use the weather link to chart leaf wetness in minutes and the temperature during that infection period to monitor for that. So another use for weather stations is to calculate growing degree days. So again, it's risky to make your management decisions based on the calendar. The development rate from emergence to maturity for many plants and insects depends upon the daily air temperature. Because many development events of plants and insects depend on the accumulation of specific quantities of heat, it's possible to predict when these events should occur during the growing season, regardless of the differences in temperature from year to year. So that would be like the dates that the flower will bloom, or an insect will emerge from dormancy, or the time that a crop will reach maturity. So to calculate growing degree days, first you need, it's an equation that you need the mean temperature first. And so you can acquire the mean temperature by adding together the high and low temperature for the day and divide that by 2. And then if that temperature is at or below the base temperature for a crop or pest of interest, then the growing degree day value is 0. If the mean temperature is above the base temperature, then the growing degree day equals the value of the mean temperature minus the base temperature. So that may not be entirely clear, but by downloading the data in Excel format, you could build that equation and calculate growing degree days that way. There is also growing degree day calculator that you can set your crop's base temperature, and that will vary depending on the type of crop that you're interested in. And I'm not going to go into that too much, but so you could set a custom date range for that, and then calculate how many growing degree days have been accumulated so far during that time period. And I think I cut off the title of this chart, but this is the phenology model developed by Scott White that helps to equate the growing degree days to the grow stage of the blue high bush, or sorry, the wild blueberry plant. So you see, I ran this from May 1st into July, the end of July, and we've calculated 562 growing degree days during that time period. And then if I look down to the chart, we'll say it's the bearing fruit year. We'd be somewhere past stems with open flowers at 50% stage. But that's just one example for wild blueberries. These types of models exist for every plant and insect imaginable. With take that with a grain of salt, because they always haven't been developed for Nova Scotia, so it does take a bit of ground truthing as well. Another more advanced use of on-farm weather data is through a decision support tool. And this was developed by my colleague, Michelle Cortens, our tree fruit specialist. And it was adapted from the Mary Blight model developed at the University of Maryland. But this is a web-based tool for tree fruit growers to help monitor for the risk of fire blight infection. So it uses the farmer's local weather station to assess for that risk, and informs decisions to spray and the time of costly antibiotics. So a lot of the times with these types of diseases, the types of products that are applied need to go on before the infection, and so it can lead to overspraying just to be safe. So this just provides an extra level of confidence to those growers who use this, that they may not need to spray and can save some money. So if any of these use cases are of interest to you, and it's not meant to be an exhaustive list, it's just to show some examples and get some ideas flowing for yourself. But if it is of interest to you and you're not quite ready to take that leap and purchase your own weather station, Perennia has developed the Farm Data Tools website. One of the features is the farm weather map that is up on the screen here. And this is really a mesonet, which is a network of weather stations. I think there's 100 weather stations here in Nova Scotia that are featured on the map. And so you can use this, you can go and check the weather station that's closest to your farm or field and see what the current conditions are. So here's an example of the pop-up window, and you do click on one of the stations, so you can see all those current conditions: temperature, wind, humidity, pressure, dew point, daily rain. You'll also notice that the growing degree day calculator is tucked in this pop-up window as well. So if you wanted to use that tool and didn't want to generate those calculations manually by yourself, this is a very easy way to generate that number. There's also a download feature in the top right hand corner of the pop-up window, and so you can download a limited version of the data. And so you can also this is also where you find the palm blight model as well. So if there's any tree fruit growers on the call who aren't aware of that and are wondering where they find it, you can see it listed on the menu on the left in the applications. There is a cost to palm blight, but if anyone is interested in that, I can help connect you with Michelle to find out more. But very useful that in both instances, for the growing degree day calculator and palm blight, that you can, if you did purchase your own weather station, you can connect it to both of those features. So that concludes my presentation today. I'd like to thank you all for listening, and feel free to reach out afterwards. This is my contact information. I love to hear from you with any questions, and hear what your ideas are for use cases on your farm as well.
Thank you so much. Sorry, thank you so much, Colin. Yes, we do have some questions for you. So please don't go away. Okay, thank you everyone for listening. Can you unshare your screen, please?
Sure. Yeah.
That's great. And we finished pretty early. And I always think a refresh or reminding of how to access data and how those data can be useful in your agriculture production is quite important. As you know, technology change and things get upgrade every so often. So it's good to refresh your mind during winter months and then before you go into the season. Okay, we do have some questions here for Colin, and then I'm just going to address them together because one of some of the questions are very good questions about how to access data. So Colin, if you don't own a station, how do you access your data, including historical data, and how do you know the station's site information, and how do you access the 15 minutes data? So those are the same kind of type of question. How do you get the data from a station if you don't own one?
Yeah, if you don't own the station, like how I ended off the presentation, I would recommend that you check out Farm Data Tools. That's probably the best place to access a station that's closest to your farm and see current conditions. Like I mentioned, you can download some limited historical data. Um, it doesn't include all of the parameters that are measured by the weather station, but that is we are going to expand upon that through work this winter. So in the future, you will be able to download all of the data from any of those stations. And if you have any questions or concerns about gaining access to farm data tools, I'd encourage you to reach out, and I'd be more than happy to give you some tips to get in there, or I can walk you through it one-on-one as well.
Great. Okay, and the second question is about soil temperature. Can you get soil temperature from your soil weather stations?
Yes, yeah, you can get soil temperature. So I think I showed a quick example of that with determining the optimal seeding timing. And a soil temperature probe would be attached to the Enviro monitor node. So it's an additional sensor to the standard weather station.
Okay, great. The next question is about quality assurance and quality control of your weather station data. How do you manage that perspective?
So we monitor for down sensors. If there's any downtime, we'll see alerts from that and do what we can to address it. Some of the stations, like I mentioned, Perennia owns 12 of their own stations, so we have a little bit more control over maintenance and quality control, quality assurance over those stations. The remainder are grower or industry owned. And we do our best to provide some recommendations to those owners about any downtime that they may have. But where those are owned by those people, there's little more than we can do than to assist them that way. Another way that we're dealing with some of the quality issues is to follow Davis Instruments recommended schedule for maintenance and replacement parts as well. So on our stations, we do a couple visits every year to follow that schedule.
Okay. Great. The next two questions are the same topic, so I'm going to address them together. How well do you find your leaf wetness sensor are working? And the second question to follow up on that is there a separate sensor for leaf wetness, and what does it look like? Is it calibrated to actual leaf, or for example, a sensor can dry off sooner than the actual leaf? So I think it's about how well do we find the leaf wetness sensor data collecting from the station, Colin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean they work. You get readings from them. It is it a true representation of a leaf's surface? That's not something that we have a lot of experience validating, but from what we've heard from growers is that the the values from the leaf moisture sensor is useful. It can tell you something, but it requires some in-field verification as well. And it starts recording the time that it's wet as soon as there's moisture on that sensor. So
Okay.
it does take some interpretation, and it's not exactly how moisture will interact on a leaf, for example. And then the where that sensor is placed can also have some effect as well. So if it's sort of buried in the canopy, then it may be more shaded, more protected from the wind, and more protected from the sun, and it may not dry off as quickly as if it was placed maybe up high or towards the outside of a row. So, like I said, it does take some ground truthing to gain some confidence with using that sensor. But it is an additional sensor to the standard weather station that we saw mounted on the wooden post, and it would be attached to an Enviro monitor node, sort of remote from the weather station, and that's where you can place it, like in an orchard row.
Great. Okay, we do have a few more minutes, so if you guys like to keep asking questions, please send me in. The next question is about any plans to utilize this weather station data for regional modeling and analyze. I think this is the big vague question. I'm not sure if he's referring to plant or pest modeling or weather station regional weather pattern modeling. So feel free to answer these questions in a way you like, Colin, or I can ask this grower to readdress this question.
Yeah, yeah. So very early stages of some plans to share the data, perhaps through the open data portal, the Nova Scotia open data portal, at least the Perennia owned stations. Um, and our hope would be that we are providing that data to the broader agricultural industry with some metadata behind it as well, and put that out there for the agriculture community, for researchers, for industry to use for that that broader modeling of, if we have 10 years of data that we're able to share through the open data portal, we could see that being very useful for looking at how the weather and trends are changing here in Nova Scotia. So we're hoping that sharing that data, and then other folks can do that good work.
Perfect. Okay, and the next question is about the price of the weather station. So as you mentioned, it's about $6,000 to $7,000 after you set it up. This grower is wondering, is there a less costly setup that can still provide those valuable weather data for the farm?
Yeah, so the Davis Vantage Pro 2 is the one that we have the most experience with. It there is certainly other stations or standalone sensors that could be configured. It really just depends on what you have in mind, what you're hoping to get from a particular sensor or suite of sensors. But if you are only interested in wind speed at some remote site, that I am almost positive that there is something in the marketplace that would enable you to do that at a much lower price point.
Right, that's true. And then we do have some good programs around NSDA. So if you guys want to check out the NSDA program website, I believe there's some program might be able to help you on that purchasing.
Yeah.
Okay, have one more questions on my list here, and if we don't see any more, we can call it for a day. The last question I have here is, do the stations measure vapor pressure deficit? That's a very specific question.
Yes, Scott, I don't think that they do. We've listed off all of the measurements and the calculated measurements as well, and I don't believe that is one that is covered by the station or the sensors. But be interested to hear more about what you had in mind for that.
Great. Well, perfect. As I show on there, last slide I have is about tomorrow's last getting into the weed section for the year. So our horticulturalist and field plant pathologist Dustin is going to talk about culture practice to improve disease control. As we all know, last year was a very bad year for the disease. If you are a CCA, please use your phone to scan this barcode on the right top corner, and we don't have pesticide points for this section, so please don't need to worry about anything. Lastly, I just want to say thank you so much for all joining us today, and you will receive an email and follow-up email by the end of today from me with some useful information about today's section. Okay, if I don't see any more questions, let's just call it for a day. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. See you tomorrow.